running around the White House,
Not a joke,
undercutting the president. But you see the president there, and he kind of looks like, let's just say, an aged Tommy Boy that maybe Dad gave the keys to the company to, and some crazy things happen.
I don't want to speak for President Lincoln posthumously, but I suspect if he'd heard about an attack in Barcelona where now 14 people were killed, wouldn't have made his second reaction to that to look up the story, false story about General Pershing putting pig's blood on bullets.
Yeah, seems that we're at a low point in American history. Last month, the president compared
Civil War was probably a little worse. That was bad.
Well, I'm worried about what's coming.
Great Depression, pretty bad.
Pretty bad.
That was probably worse.
This is a pretty low point. Now the vice president.
You know, influenza. A lot of people die from influenza.
Now the vice president.
You know, influenza. A lot of people die from influenza. That was probably worse.
We're at a low point in presidential history. Now the vice president is comparing Trump to another.
I don't know. Did you ever see how Gerald Ford dressed in the middle of the disco era?
There's that.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
I love Gerald Ford.
So in the wake of this terror attack, there are a couple of other things to bring to the table pertaining to President Trump, who began his day yesterday by targeting two senators in his own party, Lindsey Graham and Jeff Flake. Now he's getting some tough straight talk from a powerful Republican senator who he vetted for vice president and later considered for Secretary of State. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, told the Chattanooga Rotary Club yesterday that despite his good relationship with the president, he could no longer ignore, quote, the elephant in the room. Dismayed by the daily distractions, he later said to reporters that there needs to be, quote, some radical changes in the way the president conducts himself.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful. He also recently has not demonstrated that he understands the character of this nation. He has not demonstrated that he understands what has made this nation great and what it is today. And he's got to demonstrate the characteristics of a president who understands that. And without the things that I just mentioned happening, our nation is going to go through great peril.
I think we all, around the table, while we were listening to that, said this is a big moment. This is actually
profile and courage.
Actually, you know, creeping up on a Howard Baker moment where he says the president doesn't have the stability. He doesn't have the knowledge, working knowledge. He hasn't shown it to be president of the United States.
And there were sort of shades of this is unfixable. I mean, he's saying the president needs to change his behavior, but it appears that these are permanent flaws, that these aspects of this president are not going to change, and therefore perhaps others might need to act.
So, Casey, with Bob Corker's extraordinary statement, I mean, I say extraordinary. It's obvious to everybody. But extraordinary for a powerful Republican elected leader to come out and say that. But you actually can see this as a natural progression for Marco Rubio going out and firing off those tweets. Cory Gardner in his town hall meeting speaking truth to power. Even when people were jeering him, Cory didn't give a damn. He spoke truth to power. Pretty extraordinary. We can talk about Jeff Flake. We can talk about Lindsey Graham. We can always talk about John McCain and Ben Sasse. Right. I mean, we're starting to count up 5, 6, 7 Republicans, 7 Republican senators right there that are saying enough.
Yeah, and look, I think Corker is somebody who has had this presidency era, who had a shot at being inside this administration. That's not true for a lot of these other moderates and persistent critics of the president. So he, I think, has an understanding. He's traveled on the plane with Trump, and I think that says a lot. I also, one thing that stood out to me was the framing of what he said. He said that he doesn't think the president understands what has made this nation great. That is a huge repudiation of the entirety of the Trump campaign that was plastered on hats, has been plastered on hats. Make America great again. If he doesn't understand what made America great in the first place, that strikes me as a very deep an important.
And really, Casey mentioned that he had the president's ear. He's also had a lot of time to look at this president firsthand. To say he doesn't have the stability is saying he's recognizing something alarming.
His stability. Think about that word.
That's
competence, he said, but stability also. He doesn't have the temperament or the makeup
for the job. That's not an attack, by the way. That's an analysis. That's a concern.
And that's how our allies feel, right? I mean, he's also looking at this. Yes, he may have been talking about Charlottesville, but in the context of all of what we're facing internationally, our allies are unsure of where we are in North Korea. All of that plays in here.
And, you know, Yamiche, it seems to me that Senator Corker is the perfect example of the internal struggle many Republicans in that building behind you are having with President Trump. Senator Corker has come on this show now for the last couple of years during President Trump's, well, during his campaign and then during the sort of 7 months of his administration, during difficult times, faced a lot of questions from us, whether it was the Access Hollywood or on and on and on, right up now till Charlottesville. And he said, you know, I want to give this president some time. I want to give him some space. He would condemn in the moment, but he would always say, I want to give him a little bit of time. It appears they're running out of patience with this president.
There are a lot of Republicans that I've been talking to that tell me that they are, in fact, running out of patience, that they really did try to give him the benefit of the doubt. The fact that he was able to win the nomination and then with the presidency was surprising to his party. And while some people thought, okay, this guy is brash, he's a little wild, at the end of the day, they thought once he's in office, he'll be able to get legislation passed. Republicans have real things that they've been waiting to do for 8 years. They have all these different plans, infrastructure, health care, tax reform. But really what they're seeing is a president that is picking fights with the very people that he needs to help him. You think about his attacks on Mitch McConnell, his arguments with Jeff Sessions. So really the Republicans I talked to have been weighing, one, whether or not to pull support altogether from the president. And I've even been talking to some black Republicans who are wondering whether or not the party as a whole is a place that they can remain.
Yeah, well, you had business leaders walking out on the president. You had members of the military being critical. You have some Republicans stepping up. And also this now, 21st Century Fox Chief Executive James Murdoch has criticized President Trump's reaction to the violence in Charlottesville and pledged to donate $1 million to the Anti-Defamation League. In a personal email yesterday to friends later confirmed by a Fox spokesman, the son of Rupert Murdoch, a close friend of President Trump's, wrote that while it wasn't his habit to weigh in on current affairs, quote, what we watched this last week in Charlottesville and the reaction to it by the President of the United States concern all of us as Americans and free people. He added, I can't even believe I have to write this. Standing up to Nazis is essential. There are no good Nazis or Klansmen or terrorists. Democrats, Republicans, and others must all agree on this, and it compromises nothing for them to do so. Murdoch went on to say that he and his wife plan to donate $1 million to the Anti-Defamation League and urged others to do the same. That's big. That's a close friend of the president. They spent lots of time together. I know they were together the Sunday after President Trump won the election. They were hanging out together with friends and very tight.
Well, obviously,
that's a departure.
We're talking about Rupert Murdoch his son James, who obviously helps run the company. And obviously Rupert Murdoch, one of the most powerful guys in media, actually still is spending a good bit of time with Donald Trump, and by all accounts is telling him, get rid of Steve Bannon, get your head down, and start doing your business. Even a man who many consider to be his closest ally in media, Rupert Murdoch. If you read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal day in and day out, they are doing the right thing when it comes to criticizing this president. Again, this president is finding himself more and more isolated, and this very commendable letter by James Murdoch shows just how small this president's circle is becoming, where he's now surrounded by, you know, perhaps white nationalists and a few people who pathetically cling to power for their resume.
Right, and he's hurting his capital, right? His ability to maneuver, whether it's domestically on legislation or internationally. He's diminishing his ability to operate, and we're seeing that with the resignations from the various councils. But I think even before Charlottesville, there was this growing desire, as you all know and have talked a lot about, for greater internal discipline for how the policy process is working, discipline for how the White House itself operates, discipline with respect to leaks, discipline with respect to the messaging. And I think all of that has been, in many ways, lacking. And I think the reactions you're seeing, both fundamental reactions to some of the things that have come in the wake of Charlottesville, but also even before that, the lack of policy progress on the Hill, and certainly challenges with the president's communication and lack of coordination within the administration has been a real challenge. And I think you're seeing and feeling a lot of frustration, certainly from even the closest of allies to this president.
You know, Rick, one of the impacts of the president's comments this week in Charlottesville is that everyone up and down the government is being made to answer for it. So you had the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. He has to come out at an event where he'd like to focus on other things and talk about the Ku Klux Klan and talk about Nazis and talk about what happened in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia. What does that do to a State Department to have all the attention and all the oxygen on something like that and not where he wants it? And by the way, not to have the staff to get the things done that he wants to get done.
By the way, the biggest gimme in politics is criticizing Nazis. I think
you'd think. You would think at least since 1945.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's a no-brainer. You can always do that successfully, and President Trump could not. And in fact, Willie, as you say, it's a huge distraction for everybody in government that you have to, instead of going about your daily business, you have to support something that the president said, and it just speaks to how transgressive his presidency is, that it undermines just the regular operations of government. Not only are they not doing the blocking and tackling in the White House, that is getting in the way of the agencies doing that, and that's a real problem.
And Casey, we keep hearing that, oh, no, we're going to go back to health care reform. We're going to pass tax reform. We're going to get, this was infrastructure
week.
Had
like a big diagram.
You know, what a telling story yesterday that the president disbanded his infrastructure council because people were already starting to quit that. How remarkable. You can't even have presidential councils because people will quit. What impact is this going to have on the Hill for passing health care reform, for passing tax reform, for passing whatever type of reform he wants to pass, when you now have 5, 6, 7 Republican senators that the president has decided unilaterally to go to war with?
Yeah, I think obviously it is going to make their agenda that much harder. I think on tax reform in particular, a lot of people like Gary Cohn, who has been very privately upset by the president's remarks. He is a critical player. And so if you start to lose people like that from the administration, or lose, they're on their heart anymore.
Have you heard anything? There was a rumor on Wall Street yesterday that he was leaving, and but then the White House pushed back hard. Have you guys heard anything on whether he's even considering leaving?
I have not heard from the White House. There was, as you say, pushback. There's been some conversations on the Hill around what might, if he does decide to go, what might happen with tax reform. But look, I think broadly on the agenda itself, I mean, even before you get to trying to rewrite the tax code, we're heading for some major crises here. The president's going to have to decide whether or not he wants to shut down the government over funding his border wall. They're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. That's, I think, a big part of what Mitch McConnell is thinking as he tries to respond to this in a forceful but careful way, because he doesn't want to have to be in a position where, Republicans are essentially, our government stops functioning entirely because they can't do their jobs.
I just wonder, Joe, if there's a note to members of the cabinet right now in the president's inner circle, Gary Cohn, others, when you have the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee talking about the president's stability.
Right.
Is it okay just to be privately upset? At this point, I think that's irresponsible. I mean, you can be privately upset as much as you want, but you're here for this country.
I mean,
the president's unstable.
You're asking me personally. I think
I couldn't do it. Yeah.
I think if we're talking about concerns about stability, then being inside, trying to bring stability to an erratic situation, maybe that's justifiable. But if you're talking about a man who uses his position to bring aid and comfort to white supremacists, to cheer David Duke, to have David Duke cheer him back, to have neo-Nazis and Klansmen praising him, then Willie, at that point, if you are Gary Cohn, at that point you are no longer serving the United States of America. You are serving a man who is against everything this country stands for when he embraces white supremacy. And I don't know how you justify staying, especially if, like Gary Cohn, you've done so many noble things in the past, contributing to Jewish centers and other charities.
Well, I think the two arguments you just made are the ones that are going through the minds of people like Gary Cohn. He wants to be a pillar of stability. He wants to get tax reform done. He's a guy that Wall Street trusts. He's one of them. They think he's an adult in that room, and that's why you saw when there were rumors he was leaving, the market went down and the White House had to come out and push back against that. But as you say, he and his family are leaders in the Jewish community. He's from Ohio. They've done a lot of good work there and in New York as well. So he has to make a decision. Is it more important for him to be there to stabilize the economy, to push through an agenda?
To get a position?
Or does his core pull him away from the White House because he doesn't want to be at the side of the man whose beliefs